We're counting down to Friday as the FBI undertakes a week-long investigation into the sexual misconduct allegations against Brett Kavanaugh. This morning, Democrats are demanding more information about the scope of the probe.
Plus, breaking overnight after a weekend of frantic talks, the U.S. and Canada have reached a last-minute deal to salvage NAFTA.
And devastation in Indonesia. The death toll has hit more than 800 after the country was hit by an earthquake and tsunami. Rescuers are digging through rubble, hoping to find survivors. Good morning, everyone. It is Monday, October 1st. I'm Ayman Mohideen alongside Hallie Jackson in Washington, D.C. Well, the FBI investigation into Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh is underway as the Trump administration looks to limit the probe. President Trump said in a tweet Saturday night that he wants the FBI to interview whoever agents deem appropriate at their own discretion. However, the New York Times reports that the White House authorized the FBI to interview just 4 witnesses: Mark Judge, Leland Kaiser, a high school friend of Christine Blasey Ford, P.J. Smith, another party guest, and Deborah Ramirez, who accused Kavanaugh of sexual misconduct at Yale. While investigators will look into the claims of Ford and Ramirez, a senior U.S. official and another source familiar with the matter tell NBC News the FBI has not been allowed to investigate the allegations made by Julie Swetnick, who accused Kavanaugh of sexual misconduct in high school. Now, those sources also say that former classmates who have contradicted Kavanaugh's account of his college alcohol consumption, instead describing him as a frequent heavy drinker, do not appear on a specific witness list provided by the FBI, to the FBI, rather, by the White House counsel's office. Now, according to several people who discussed the guidelines on the condition of anonymity, they characterized the instructions as a significant constraint on the probe and cautioned that the limited scope may actually make it more difficult to pursue additional leads. Meanwhile, the Washington Post reports that according to 2 administration officials, the White House had not placed any limits on the investigation into the allegations, but was opposed to a fishing expedition that could take a look at Kavanaugh's credibility and behavior.
So, Senate Democrats are now demanding more information about what exactly is the scope of this FBI investigation into sexual misconduct allegations against Brett Kavanaugh. And according to the New York Times, officials have said this limited supplemental background check could be wrapped up as early as today. But Democrats have questions about what limited means exactly. Senator Dianne Feinstein, the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, sent a letter to White House counsel Don McGahn and FBI Director Christopher Wray. She wants a copy of the written directive the White House sent to the FBI. She wrote in part, quote, "If the FBI requests any expansion beyond the initial directive, please provide the names of any additional witnesses or evidence." Her Democratic colleagues are not thrilled with what they see as the scope of this background check. Watch.
To limit the FBI as to the scope and who they're going to question, that really I wanted to use the word farce, but that's not the kind of investigation that all of us are expecting the FBI to conduct.
And I'm very concerned about this because the White House should not be allowed to micromanage an FBI investigation. I've never heard that the White House, either under this president or other presidents, is saying, well, you can't interview this person, you can't look at this time period, you can only look at these people from one side of the street from when they were growing up. I mean, come on.
All right, so a source has confirmed to NBC News that the FBI has spoken with Deborah Ramirez as part of its investigation into the sexual misconduct claims against Kavanaugh. Ramirez was the second woman to come forward with an accusation against Kavanaugh. She claims he exposed himself to her during his time at Yale. And according to NBC News, Ramirez provided the FBI with a list of witnesses whom she says corroborate her claim. Meanwhile, lawyers for Christine Blasey Ford, that's Kavanaugh's first accuser, told NBC News yesterday that neither Ford or her legal team have been contacted by the FBI since President Trump ordered the supplemental FBI background investigation on Friday.
NBC News, meantime, is getting its first look at a letter we obtained overnight sent to all Republican senators. It's from Rachel Mitchell, the outside counsel who questioned Christine Blasey Ford and Brett Kavanaugh at last week's hearing. And in it, she says no reasonable prosecutor would bring sexual assault charges against Kavanaugh. She writes, the bottom line is that a he said, she said case is incredibly difficult to prove, but went on to say this case is even weaker than that. Mitchell says, quote, Dr. Ford identified other witnesses to the event, and those witnesses witnesses either refuted her allegations or failed to corroborate them. Mitchell highlighted what she said were inconsistencies in Ford's memory of dates, events, details. She also made a point to note, while I am a registered Republican, I am not a political or partisan person. Worth mentioning, Mitchell does not provide her analysis of Kavanaugh's answers or testimony, just Dr. Ford's.
Interesting. All right, joining us now, White House reporter for the Associated Press, Jill Colvin. Jill, great to have you with us on this Monday morning. So how have the allegations against Brett Kavanaugh impacted the conversation about sexual misconduct in Washington, D.C.? It's been an issue that's been lingering in that city for some time now, affecting people on Capitol Hill. But what has been the bigger picture?
Absolutely. I mean, look, this is a conversation that obviously is going around all across the country and really hit Washington when allegations against a slew of members of Congress came up. So this is something that has been kind of in the minds of people for many, many months now. But this city, like the rest of the nation, was just absolutely transfixed throughout Dr. Ford's testimony, kind of watching the back and forth, paying attention here to the TikTok as Republicans and Democrats fight over the scope of the inquiry here and what the FBI is going to do. This has caught the attention unlike anything else, to the point where other things in Washington right now, things like, the fate of Rod Rosenstein, for instance, the Deputy Attorney General, really seem to have faded into the background.
It's so interesting, Jill. You're right, because we talk about things like the president saying he's in love with Kim Jong-un, fell in love with him, the NAFTA deal. We're talking about all that. But this certainly has captivated the nation's attention. Let's talk timeline for a second here, right? We know that this thing is not going to go longer than Friday, at least according to the parameters that have been set. The new Supreme Court term starts actually today, right? And then you got the midterms coming up in a month. How does this all fit together? How does this all play out?
Well, the number one question now is whether the FBI will finish the investigation before Friday. We know that the White House is desperate to have this wrap up as soon as possible. They want to make sure that there is no chance that they will put themselves in a situation where it is post-midterms, where they might have no longer a majority in the Senate and have this seat up for grabs. But the White House is also really facing a big risk here. Of course, they were forced to sort of go along with this FBI investigation, which the president had not supported early on. But one of the benefits of this FBI investigation for the White House, for the president, is that if nothing new emerges, if the FBI doesn't find any evidence here, it would help kind of lift this cloud over Brett Kavanaugh. If now you've got questions about whether this FBI investigation was actually done thoroughly, they didn't call as many witnesses as they should have, they're not going to be able to kind of lift that cloud over him.
What's also notable, Jill, there is, based on my reporting with sources in and around the White House, there's no backup plan. It's Brett Kavanaugh. The president himself seemed to acknowledge that. Officials that I talked to say, yeah, there's not a plan B that is actively being discussed. They're really sort of putting all their eggs in the Kavanaugh basket.
Absolutely, yeah. The president has said this himself, that he has not considered any replacement. From my understanding and from what sources have told me, there has been no serious vetting, no work done queuing up another potential nominee. So they're resting everything on Kavanaugh right now.
Jill Colvin, full of coffee at this early hour. Jill? We'll see you in a little bit. Thanks for chatting with us here. We are also waking up to some big news this morning, big news on trade. The U.S. and Canada have now reached a deal after weeks of back and forth. The administration is calling it, quote, the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement. And depending on your view, it's either an all-new deal replacing NAFTA or a revised, renamed version salvaging NAFTA. It comes about a month after the U.S. and Mexico signed a trade deal between the two of them. At the time, the administration threatened to leave Canada out. Leaders for the three countries are expected to sign the deal before the end of next month. It then goes to Congress to be ratified. So the big sticking point here was dairy, right? But as part of this agreement, Canada will make some concessions on that, letting up on protections for its dairy market. That's really been a source of frustration for the U.S. and a key talking point of President Trump's. So in return, the United States will dial back the threat of new auto tariffs, although the details on that still aren't crystal clear. The president's steel and aluminum tariffs are not part of this agreement and will stay in place. This new deal also updates several pieces of NAFTA, like adding provisions on digital trade and intellectual property, and it'll come up for review every 6 years. The administration calls that a, quote, significant new form of leverage that allows the U.S. to keep making sure this deal is what it wants.
All right, so the Las Vegas Strip will go dark tonight to honor the victims of the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history 1 year ago today. 58 lives were lost and more than 400 people were injured when gunman Stephen Paddock opened fire from a high-rise hotel onto unsuspecting concertgoers during the Route 91 Harvest Country Music Festival. Paddock later turned the gun on himself as police closed in on his room at the Mandalay Bay Hotel. No motive, believe it or not, has ever been determined. The Strip will go dark just after 10 p.m. tonight, and at 10:05 p.m., the same time as shots rang out 1 year ago, a somber reading of victims' names will begin at a memorial site downtown. A new remembrance wall will also be dedicated in the victims' honor. All right, still ahead, the death toll is rising, and it is a desperate search for survivors after Indonesia was hit with a powerful earthquake and tsunami. We're going to get a live report.
Plus, Saturday Night Live kicks off a new season, and yep, they're poking fun at last week's Senate Judiciary Committee hearing. We're going to show you some of that. We also have a check on the weather coming up next.
One day in America, we vote. For folks we know and folks we don't. For things we believe. For things beyond belief. For the people. For the planet. For the past. For the future. For whatever is next. Carry on. For this grand idea. A story as old as the Republic. And whatever.
Welcome back. And this morning, the focus in Indonesia is on this massive recovery effort after at least 844 people died in a devastating earthquake and tsunami. That happened Friday when a 7.5 magnitude quake hit the country, triggering a tsunami with waves as high as 20 feet. Look at these images. Rescuers are now trying to get to victims trapped in flooded rubble. Joining us now live from London, NBC News correspondent Sarah Harmon. So, Sarah, devastating images coming out of Indonesia. What is the latest this morning?
Hey, Hallie, good morning to you. As you say, 4 days on from this disaster, and we likely still don't have a full picture of this devastation. That's because most of the dead so far are in a single city, Palu, in central Indonesia. Rescuers haven't even reached the remote villages that are closest to the epicenter, and there are fears that entire towns could be wiped out. Now, over the weekend, rescuers scrambled to save people who'd been buried alive in the rubble and were screaming for help. At least one woman was pulled out alive, but they simply don't have enough of the kind of heavy equipment you really need to move the rubble. As it stands, the city of Palu is facing a very grim problem: what to do with all these bodies. Hallie, as you know, in situations like this, limiting the spread of disease and contamination is absolutely critical. They need to get these victims buried quickly. Now, volunteers have begun digging an enormous mass grave in Palu, more than 300 feet across, and sadly that means that many people won't be able to say goodbye to their loved ones before they're laid to rest. But it does show you just how concerned the government is that this natural disaster could escalate into a humanitarian crisis. People are desperate for clean drinking water, for food, and for fuel. Guys?
Sarah Harmon. Sarah, thank you for that.
All right, with that, let's switch gears for a moment. Get a quick check on your weather with NBC meteorologist Bill Cairns. Bill.
Yeah, the power of water in those tsunami videos is just
unbelievable.
You just can't imagine.
Coupled with the earthquake as well.
Oh, I know. Yeah, just misery for them. So we're dealing with our own potential for flash flooding, and it's in an area of the country that doesn't typically get a lot of it. This is Tropical Storm Rosa. It was a hurricane. It's going into the Baja of California. You can already see the rainfall heading up into Arizona. When you think of Arizona and heavy rain, the two do not go well together. They don't have the vegetation to really absorb it. They get a lot of raging rivers in areas that are typically dry. They call them washes, and that's going to be the problem. So for that reason, we have 11 million people at risk of flash flooding, and after today, it extends northwards all the way through much of Utah, even the San Juan Mountains of Colorado, and even a little sliver here of the southern eastern portions of Idaho. So how much rain are we talking about? In the Phoenix area, we could even see about 2 inches of rain, so a lot of the washes will fill up with that. This area of red in here with a little bit of pink is 3 to 4 inches of rain. They call this the rim. As you drive from Phoenix up to Flagstaff, you go up in elevation significantly in this area. That'll help to wring out the moisture. So that's where Prescott to Sedona, where we could see some of the worst flooding. And then further to the north towards the Grand Canyon and even southern Utah around Cedar Cedar City up to 2 inches of rainfall. So here's the timing on this mess. We're watching the storm currently heading to the north. We're not worried about winds at all. It'll significantly weaken by the time it gets to Arizona, but the heaviest rainfall is expected to arrive with that yellow coloring here as we go through Tuesday afternoon. That's when we could see the greatest threat of flash flooding. The other stories out there today on this first day of October, it's warm. And it won't stop. I mean, it's going to be a very warm start to the month of October, at least the first week, maybe the first 2 weeks. We are going to stay in the 80s for a good chunk of the country. This is on the heels of the warmest September we've ever seen in many areas of the Southeast. 84 in D.C. today, 83 in Atlanta, 86 in St. Louis. There will be some rain today in northern New England, and tomorrow some of that will try to head down to New York City. But, I mean, look at this map, Amy. I mean, it still looks like summer with 88 in St. Louis the next 2 days.
90 in Miami still.
Yes.
All right, Bill, thanks for that. And I know you're a big fan of Saturday Night Live, so I'm sure you caught the season premiere, the 44th season, really taking us back into the Senate Judiciary hearing for Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. But this time, it was Academy Award winner Matt Damon who brought the fury in the season's cold open. Watch this.
We've heard from the alleged victim, but now it's time to hear from the hero, Judge Brett Kavanaugh.
I'm going to start at an 11. I'm going to take it to about a 15 real quick. Now, I am usually an optimist. I'm a keg is half full kind of guy. But what I've seen from the monsters on this committee makes me want to puke, and not from beer. Dr. Ford has no evidence, none. Meanwhile, I've got these. I've got these calendars. These beautiful, creepy calendars.
Give me a can of water.
All right, still ahead. 162 games were clearly not enough to decide anything, as for the first time in baseball history, 2 divisions will be determined by 1-game playoffs literally on the same day. We're going to have all the details next in sports. So in the end, Senator Flake agreed to send the nomination out of committee, but would not support it on the full Senate floor without that additional FBI investigation. Now, if the investigation shows that Kavanaugh lied to Congress, Flake says the nomination is over. All right, joining us once again, White House reporter for the Associated Press, Jill Colvin. Jill, great to have you back with us one more. So let's talk a little bit about the investigation. Will an investigation, even with a limited scope as we've seen play out over the course of the last couple of days, be enough for Republicans like Senator Jeff Flake, Elisa Murkowski, and others who are on the fence or who remain on the fence about Kavanaugh's confirmation? Will this be enough to satisfy their concerns?
Well, that is the big question that we are all going to be asking all of our sources and everyone we know this week, trying to get a handle on what that small handful of undecided senators is going to do. The kind of general wisdom in Washington right now is that barring any new massive revelation, barring a new accuser coming forward, barring some big bombshell, the feeling is that Kavanaugh probably will end up being confirmed at the end of all of this. But this is really something that is in flux right now. And right now, you know, I think a lot will depend on how this investigation proceeds forward. You know, this idea of this being a limited in scope and limited in time investigation is something that started with the Senate Judiciary Committee. That's their own language here. But how that's interpreted and how senators are fighting over this, I think will have a significant impact.
Jill, can we talk a little bit about something else, too? Because remember last week when this hearing was going down, there was a point where it seemed like we would have a split-screen moment. Brett Kavanaugh, this hearing, Dr. Blasey Ford. Then on the other side, you were going to have this meeting with President Trump and Rod Rosenstein. The president came out and said, I'm clearing my schedule because he wanted to focus on the hearing. And he pushed that Rosenstein meeting with the Deputy Attorney General to, I think, as early as today, right? What are we hearing about that? Is there any more sort of Rosenstein-related news here?
Well, this is really all in flux right now, and there's obviously also been some chatter that the president has used this threat about Rosenstein when this meeting is going to happen as a political tool to distract from any of the Kavanaugh news at times when he's felt like the narrative has been going in a direction against him. At this point, we do not know when this meeting is going to be scheduled, but kind of an interesting little hiccup to all of this is that Rosenstein has also been a key contact for primarily Jeff Flake as they're trying to determine the scope of this FBI investigation. And so you just see how Rosenstein is sort of involved in everything. It's not just the Russia investigation. It's even this the Ford investigation.
Right.
Yeah, no doubt he's going to have an impact on so many things. All right, Jill Colvin, live for us in Washington, D.C. as always. Thanks, Jill. Still ahead, we continue to follow the breaking news overnight. The United States reaches a trade deal to bring Canada into its proposed trade agreement with Mexico.
Just last week, the president said he rejected a meeting with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. So we're bringing in a colleague from CNBC to take us inside this new deal. We're back in just a moment. Welcome back. Let's get more on that breaking news from overnight. The U.S. coming to a deal with Canada to join the proposed trade agreement with Mexico. CNBC's Juliana Tattlebaum joins us live now from London. Juliana, big news on this, right? So what more can you tell us? What other details are there?
Yes, thank you, Hallie. So after round-the-clock negotiations over the weekend, the U.S. and Canada finally reached an agreement on a new trade deal. This new deal will be called USMCA for U.S., Mexico, and Canada, and it will replace the prior NAFTA deal. Now, constituents from the U.S., Canada, and Mexico are set to sign the accord by the end of November, just before the Mexican president is due to exit office. Now, in terms of highlights of this deal, it will offer improved access for U.S. farmers to Canada's dairy market, also tighter rules around origin of auto production, and also some groundbreaking provisions around intellectual property and digital trade. So really modernizing the old NAFTA agreement. In terms of market reaction, unsurprisingly, we've seen a rally in U.S. futures and also a nice bounce in the Mexican and Canadian currencies. Now, meanwhile, some much less positive news in the social media front. Facebook has announced that they discovered a massive security issue on Friday that affects 50 million accounts. Hackers had access to 15 million accounts. They have now fixed the issue, but they have yet to determine whether this data was used inappropriately. Back to you guys.
Juliana Tattlebaum live from London. Juliana, thank you for that. Appreciate it.
All right, switching gears for a moment. Overnight, Iran's Revolutionary Guard said it has launched ballistic missiles into Syria targeting militants it claims was behind the recent attack on a military parade in Iran that killed at least 25 people. Iranian state media showed the launch of one of the missiles, which was inscribed with, quote, "Death to America, death to Israel, death to Al Saud," a reference to the Saudi royal family, in addition to including the Arabic phrase, quote, "Kill the friends of Sane." A lot of inscriptions on those missiles. Well, Iran alleges that the United States and several regional nations, including Saudi Arabia, are responsible for the attack that killed at least 24. That comes as the Trump administration says that as part of its strategy towards Syria, the United States will remain in the country until the Syrian civil war is over in order to force Iran's retreat and prevent Tehran's expansion across the Middle East. All right, let's switch gears and bring in NBC meteorologist Bill Cairns with a quick check on your weather. Bill.
Good morning to you, Eamon. As we go into this October, we're still in the middle of hurricane season, and we can occasionally get storms that affect the West Coast. It's rare, but one is right now. This is the Mexico area, Baja California. We have a tropical storm making landfall, and the rainfall is heading up into Arizona. So it's not often that we say Phoenix is going to be one of the wettest spots in the country over the next 2 days, but that is possible. And we have one little flash flood warning, but the flash flood watches consist of about 11 million people. We get the elevated terrain and also the desert areas. We get the washes. We're going to have some problems out here in the next 2 days. The other story into October, we just finished one of the warmest Septembers ever on the East Coast, especially in the Southeast. September was off the charts warm just about everywhere from Florida right up through the Carolinas. And now we're going to October, very warm. Everyone from the Ohio Valley to New York City, about 5 to 10 degrees above average today. It's going to continue into Tuesday. St. Louis about 12 degrees above average. So it's still like summer, still needing the air conditioning in many areas. Memphis at 88 degrees. And even late in this week, the heat continues to build throughout the region. Richmond could be near 90 on Thursday. New York City into the 80s Wednesday and Thursday. So it's going to be a pretty warm week ahead. So here's some of the weather highlights. Today for traveling around Chicago late this afternoon, could have some thunderstorms that give you some delays there at O'Hare, where you've had hit and miss showers and storms. It seems like the last week or two straight from Houston all the way through coastal Louisiana. That continues. As we go throughout the middle of this week, we're going to watch a rainy Tuesday in areas in the Northeast. We clear it out for a nice Wednesday. Still very warm, as we mentioned. And the West Coast is actually going to be the wet spot. So the weather patterns to start October Cooler, wetter in the west, warmer and drier in many areas of the east. And then we end this week still with above average temperatures in the southeast. Wintry mix in areas of the northern plains. It is October. That's not unusual. And some more storms in the Great Lakes. But Eamon, almost every single climate site in the southeast saw their warmest September that's ever been recorded.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you look at the big picture, a lot of different pieces there. A little bit of everything.
Yeah, it's a lot of extremes to start October.
All right, thanks for that, Bill. Still ahead, Senator Elizabeth Warren says that a 2020 presidential run is on the table. We're going to have her very latest comments.
Plus, the latest comments from President Trump and his love for North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. His word, not mine. But there appear to be some trust issues. We're going to explain that one coming up.